Hi, I'm Gary Yagel, and welcome to the video series, A Biblical Response to Gender Confusion and Transgenderism. This is part 3, Countering Radical Gender Ideology. John Stonestreet, author of A Practical Guide to Culture, Helping the Next Generation Navigate Today's World, emphasizes the critical role of discernment required by today's teens. His words are, to not have discernment in this culture is to be brainwashed. The power of the social media to brainwash our teens is like a tidal wave driving them toward destruction. And we know, of course, especially for our loved ones who belong to Christ, that the command of our Savior is, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Our goal in this episode, then, is discernment. It is to destroy arguments and every lofty opinion against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to Christ. But our goal in refuting gender theory with sound logic is not to load the bullets into our teens' guns so that they can shoot down their LGBTQ friends, the LGBTQ crowd, or a teacher at school. It's the opposite. It's to equip our kids with such confidence that gender theory makes zero sense, that instead of being on the defensive, they can quietly focus on loving well their LGBTQ friend. So that means for us, before getting our head right, we need to get our heart right, and to do that, we need to look to Jesus. Jesus weeping over the consequences of sin. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that would make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Jesus knew that a rebellious heart blinds our eyes. He knew that the wage of sin is death, that anyone who sows to the flesh reaps destruction and corruption. And Jesus saw the way God's judgment would fall upon Jerusalem in 70 AD, and he wept. Before any efforts to logically refute the delusion of gender theory, in my opinion, we must weep. Weep for those whose bodies are mutilated. Weep for little girls desperately trying to find acceptance in the wrong places. And yes, even weep for gender ideologues. Do you think anyone can assault the dignity of the Lord of hosts and get away with it? As the author of Hebrews says, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. To help us get our heart around the brokenness of this life and the pain, here are some statistics from the Center for Disease Control. A study comparing the emotional health of the LGBTQ+ to heterosexual students. First, the feelings of sadness or hopelessness. The LGBTQ world, 60.4% feeling sad or hopeless. The heterosexual world, 26.4%. Serious contemplation of suicide. The LGBTQ world, 42.8%. The heterosexual world, 14.8%. Actual suicide attempts. The LGBTQ world, 29.4%. The heterosexual world, 6.4%. This is students. The overall, including adults, suicide attempts of those in the LGBTQ world are the transgender population, 41%. 41% attempting suicide as compared to the general population of 1.6%. Those enslaved by or promoting gender theory are not the enemy. They are held captive by the enemy, who is Satan. Nevertheless, we also need to be watchful and recognize that the evil one is like a roaring lion prowling around seeking whom he may devour. And frankly, millions of Christian kids are being led astray by gender theory. That should not be surprising to us because Proverbs 18:17 is a great description of what is happening to our kids. It says this, "The one who states his case first seems right," we might add on the internet, "until the other comes and examines him." So let's examine gender theory's case so that we can give the other side. Argument number one, the intersex condition, hermaphroditism, proves that gender is not binary. This rare birth disorder causes a human to have parts of both male and female genitalia. That's what hermaphroditism is. What is the response to that? Disorders of the reproductive system do not prove the existence of more than two genders any more than disorders of the heart and lungs prove that there are two types of hearts and lungs. Furthermore, the intersex condition occurs in 1 in 10,000 births. I looked back at the statistics for my state, Maryland, for 2022, and those statistics would work out this way. 7% or 7 children would have been born with sexual abnormalities. 68,493 of the children born would have had normal male and female genitalia. No one in his right mind can look at those statistics and conclude that gender is anything other than binary. So this case of the intersectionality, the intersex condition, does not in any way suggest that sex is more than binary, that gender is more than binary. Argument number two, gender is arbitrarily assigned at birth. How do we respond to that? Well, as I'm going to mention in a little bit more detail, one of the best ways to answer objections is with a question. So let's sort of act that out. Suppose you're having a conversation with your teen, and your teen says, gender is not a fixed part of a person's identity, but something that's merely assigned at birth. What makes you say that? Well, that's what my social studies teacher said. So use your imagination a moment. Picture the birthing room right after a baby comes out. The mom and dad cry out, "It's a boy." What makes the doctor say that? I guess they look at the baby's genitals. Right. So did they arbitrarily assign its gender or observe its gender? I guess they observed it. So is gender arbitrarily assigned at birth, or is it a biological reality discovered at birth? I guess it's discovered, a biological reality. So a common sense question is a good starting point. Further facts, 100% of birthing rooms across the world, the baby's gender is recognized by their reproductive organs. Fact number two, every civilization in the 4,000-year history of the world has understood that gender is binary. Argument number three, gender identity is not determined by your biological sex, it is your subjective choice. Response, again, asking a common sense question. So if you ask your teen this question, who says that gender is what you subjectively choose it to be, If your 3-year-old brother just finished an Iron Man cartoon and ran to the top of your basement steps, preparing to dive down the steps head first, saying to you, "I'm going to fly like Iron Man," what would you do? Well, I'd stop him. Why? Because he would get hurt diving down the steps. But he believed he could fly. Yeah, but he's too young to understand he can't. Well, how do you know he can't? He's a kid, not a bird. So, scientific reality trumps his delusion. Okay, I see the point. Science overwhelmingly proves gender is binary. In some of the other videos we've mentioned this. Let me review a couple points and add a few more. Since John Money created gender theory in the 1970s, this mistaken idea that gender can be separated from the physical body has been repeatedly disproved. In the field of genetics, every one of the 30 trillion cells in the female body is XX, the male body XY. In embryology, when the egg is fertilized by the sperm, the resulting organism is either XX or XY. 8 weeks after fertilization, if there is a Y chromosome there, meaning this is a male, that sends the message to his testes to create testosterone. And then that testosterone is distributed throughout the body. That testosterone develops the embryo into masculinity, not just its genitals, but brain as well. It is a medical fact that a mental decision to stop being male is an impossibility. The entire body is shaped by the way that testosterone has been present or not. Those who try to change their bodies by taking puberty blockers, cross-gender hormones, hormone treatments, top surgery, bottom surgery, discover that the body fights them every step of the way, and they have to remain on hormones the rest of their lives. Just one further example of science. One current movement that has arisen in the last 20 years is sex-specific surgery. And what that means in simple terms is that if a woman is having a kidney transplant and that woman gets a kidney from a male, her body will recognize that that male kidney has XY chromosomes and not XX. And so it is better to give a female kidney to a female. So again, it is a medical fact that a mental decision to change gender is an impossibility. To think that is to believe a delusion. Science overwhelmingly proves that gender is binary. Believing a delusion is a mental disorder. We have to call it like it is. Do it kindly, but truthfully. Argument number 4. Loving a transgender person means accepting their chosen gender identity. Well, let's think that through. To accept their gender identity is to affirm their self-delusion, not their value as a human person. Is it really loving to go along with this delusion? Consider anorexia. A teen girl is wanting a doctor to prescribe for her a starvation diet. Would that be loving for that doctor to do so, to continue her delusion? Consider bulimia, an eating disorder that includes self-induced vomiting. Would it be loving for a doctor to prescribe medicine to help her vomit, to continue that delusion? Or another medical phenomenon we don't hear much about, it's called transabled phenomena. These are people who are physically able-bodied who want to identify as disabled. Should a surgeon continue that delusion and amputate an arm? Of course not. Because loving does not equal affirming. I have never met any loving, successful parent who always blindly affirmed their child. As one author observes, love isn't the same thing as affirmation. Love isn't the endless repetition of yes. Love is frequently a series of no. No, you can't keep eating that. No, you can't touch that. No, you shouldn't hang out with those people. Without those no's, your kid will become an obese burn victim hanging out with drug addicts. Argument number 5. Denying the right to trans identity is trans discrimination, no different than racism, and it proves that you're transphobic. How do we respond? There is no right to force the rest of society to build policy on your delusion instead of on science-based reality. Using a person's body, for example, his reproductive organs, to determine which restroom is to be used is no more discriminatory than using a person's body, how much he weighs, to tell a 200-pound boy that he cannot wrestle in the 106-pound weight class, or using his body, how old he is, to tell a 14-year-old that he can't drive. Basing policy decisions upon biological reality is not discriminatory, but common sense. Another observation is this: legitimate human rights don't deny others' rights. Transgender students do not have the right to force the rest of the students to violate the rules of grammar that use he for boys and she for girls to adjust to their wishes, any more than Chinese students, for example, might have the right to force everyone else to speak Chinese to adjust to their wishes. Or a biological boy who claims a trans identity and thus feels uncomfortable in a male locker room does not have the right to violate the right to privacy of biological girls in the school by forcing them to take a shower with him in the girls' locker room, making them not just uncomfortable, but unsafe. Now, sometimes you'll hear a reaction to that argument by saying, well, you're accusing those who are trans of being sex abusers. No, this argument does not do that one bit. What this argument says is that we're concerned about those who are probably not trans, but they are other boys who are suffering from toxic masculinity who will take advantage of a foolish policy to harm girls and women. Or consider, thirdly, a biological boy who claims to be trans doesn't have the right to compete in athletics against biological women. That violates the rights of every woman in the league. Legitimate human rights don't violate the rights of others. And that's our point here. And then, lastly, resorting to character attacks proves you have no logical argument. And we need to teach our kids this. We need to kind of say, look, in Logic 101 class, all of us have learned that when one is arguing his case and he resorts to character attacks, which is called the ad hominem argument, that is a sure sign that he doesn't have any evidence to support his case. Argument number 6. Putting a child on puberty blockers is a safe pause in development while the child decides which gender he or she prefers. Response. Puberty blockers are untested. The most common is Lupron. It is used to chemically castrate sex offenders. It has never been approved by the FDA for use with teenagers to halt puberty. And there is zero research on the long-term effects of taking this drug starting out as teens. Also, the National Institute for Health issued a warning in 2020 that puberty blockers cause a serious loss of bone density. Teens in some states, nevertheless, can get this without parental permission at Planned Parenthood at age 12. Furthermore, when it comes to the effects of puberty blockers, 99% of those who take them go on to cross-gender hormones. It's really closer to 99%. But it turns out, though, that taking cross-gender hormones pretty much always leads to permanent sterility. So by taking puberty blockers, we're allowing our kids to get on a path that's going to lead to cross-gender hormones, and 100% of those who take cross-gender hormones will become sterile. And so we are allowing 10 and 12 and 13-year-old girls to make decisions to permanently mutilate their bodies. Another observation that stands against this idea of pushing kids down the path by taking puberty blockers is this fact. If left alone, 70% of those with gender dysphoria outgrow it, and 82% of those who experience rapid onset gender dysphoria will outgrow it. Not only that, but we now know that the adolescent brain doesn't fully develop into adulthood until age 25. Yet a group of gender theory ideologues is shoving girls down this path for their own political gain and insisting on the girl's right to make life-altering decisions at age 12. Argument number 7. If you don't affirm a child's trans identity, the child will commit suicide. Gender clinic physicians all across America are saying to parents who are hesitant about putting their daughters on gender blockers and then testosterone, would you rather have a living trans boy or a dead girl? It is a well-established fact that online gender coaches teach the children they are corrupting to say, I'm going to commit suicide if you don't let me have my way. So what are the facts about taking the pathway of gender transition to minimize the chances of suicide? There are no facts to support that whatsoever. Remember, this is a spiritual battle. This is an assault upon our children by Satan himself, who is called by Jesus a liar and the father of lies. There is just outright falsification of data by the transgender ideologue movement. Why wouldn't we expect to see that? Remember, they are walking in the footsteps of Alfred Kinsey and John Money, who we saw in the first video falsified their data. Let me give you 2 illustrations of this fraudulent research, because this argument is made quite often. The first piece of data is the malpractice lawsuit filed against the Tavistock Gender Clinic in Great Britain by a woman named Kyra Bell, who was pushed down this path of gender transition by medical ideologues, but later detransitioned. The judge in this case kept hearing the defense of Tavistock point to headlines showing that studies have shown that affirming a child's decision to go down this path minimizes their chances of suicide. Well, right after that was stated before the judge, Kyra's attorneys would stand up and show that 3 weeks later, on the back pages of the same publication, that story was retracted because it was proven to be false. Then this would repeat itself. The defense would point out some study that's supposed to show that shoving kids down affirming care pathways causes them to commit suicide less often. Then Kyra's attorneys would stand up and show that a month or 2 later, that was retracted. Finally, the judge said, are there any studies that haven't been retracted? And the answer was no, because there aren't. Let me give you a little insight into the study that is often quoted as proving this. It's called the Jack Turbin study. It's being perpetrated to show that transgender adolescents who had access to puberty blockers were 70% less likely to commit suicide. This is a complete crock. First of all, it was done online by a pro-trans lobbying group. And it's online. Next, only 11% of those respondents had actually taken puberty blockers. And then, despite this corrupted sample, it still showed that 58% who didn't take puberty blockers planned to commit suicide, so they're trying to say that puberty blockers sort of prevents this, but 55% did. Those who had taken puberty blockers, 55% did still commit suicide. But it gets worse. What this study further did demonstrate was that when it came to those who actually did attempt suicide, those who took puberty blockers had a higher rate of attempting suicide than those who had not. And when it came to those who were hospitalized because they had attempted suicide, those who had taken puberty blockers had twice the rate of being in the hospital than those who had never taken those. So our response, there is zero legitimate research to support the suicide rate decreasing when trans identity is affirmed. Here's what's going on with the statistics that make it confusing. Legitimate studies reveal the same roughly 40% suicidality or suicide ideation rate, that's the idea of committing suicide, for this population of girls before and after coming out. As we saw last time, the population of teen girls from which gender dysphoric girls come has a very high rate of comorbidities already. So this population already has a high 40% suicidality ideation rate, and that is thinking about planning suicide. So gender theory advocates appeal to this legitimate fear of parents that if their child goes into this category of being trans, they might commit suicide. That's a legitimate fear, but it's not a legitimate solution because there is no evidence that going down the affirming pathway will minimize that commitment to suicide, that suicide ideation. Why, if this is the case, does the AMA and the Academy of Pediatrics promote gender-affirming care? The answer is that gender ideologues are ideologues first, unfortunately, and physicians second in many of these American associations. Finally, in response to the idea of committing suicide, long-term studies show a troubling increase in the suicide rate of trans adults after the teen years. A study in 2011 at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden followed 324 people who had sex reassignment surgery. The study revealed that about 10 years after having the surgery, the transgendered began to experience a marked increase in mental difficulties. Most shockingly, their suicide rate rose to a level almost 20-fold above the comparable non-transgender population. Or consider a study from the UK. August 2022, the UK shuttered its only gender clinic, Tavistock, following a comprehensive review. The UK review, led by Dr. Hilary Cass, noted that gender clinic, quote, unquote, staff have told us that they feel under pressure to adopt an unquestioning affirmative approach in which children's claims about gender dysphoria are not carefully examined and underlying mental health issues are not properly taken into consideration. Or consider a study from Finland. In 2020, the Finnish National Gender Identity Development Service recommended psychotherapy as the primary treatment for young gender-confused people, not sex reassignment surgery. And just one more, Sweden now will not allow gender-affirming surgeries on youth under the age of 18. Only child psychiatric specialists are able to refer children to gender clinics for assessment that can lead to the initiation of puberty blockers or cross-gender hormone therapy. We've seen how to refute the 7 key arguments of gender theory. We need to share these truths with our loved ones, or the tidal wave of internet thought will overpower them and take them captive. But our responsibility to take a stand for God's truth goes beyond the walls of our own homes. We're called to be salt and light to the world. How do we do that? Well, here's the way one man stood for truth on this issue. He met with a school board, requested permission to meet and address the school board, and this is what he said to them. You only gave us 60 seconds to speak, so let me get to the point. You are all child abusers. You prey upon impressionable children and indoctrinate them into your insane ideological cult, a cult which holds many fanatical views, but none so deranged as the idea that boys are girls and girls are boys. By imposing this vile nonsense on students to the point of even forcing young girls to share locker rooms with boys, you deprive these kids of safety and privacy and something more fundamental, which is truth. If education is not grounded in truth, then it is worthless. Worse, it is poison. You are poison. You are predators. I can see why you tried to stop us from speaking. You know that your ideas are indefensible. You silence the opposing side because you have no arguments. You can only hide under your beds like pathetic little gutless cowards, hoping we shut up and go away. But we won't. I promise you that. Thank you for your time, and I'll talk to you later, very, very soon. Wow. Is that what Jesus meant about being salt and light? You know, that tirade, maybe all of it was true. I don't know. But I do know one thing. That is not the way Christians are to have influence. The command to be salt and light is the command to influence, to be winsome. A hostile attitude towards ideological opponents drives them away, and our goal is to win them, pulling them toward God's truth. Scripture says the wise of heart is called discerning, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Or the heart of the wise instructs his mouth and adds persuasiveness to his lips. 3 principles for focusing in the public arena, and a couple examples, and then we'll be done. First, always be courteous and welcoming. Second, appeal to mutually recognized authorities. You and I believe the Word of God. That's the basis for arguing. But that is not winsome to appeal to that authority among people that don't hold to the authority of Scripture. Much wiser to appeal to common sense and especially science, which in our world is seen as authoritative. And finally, use questions whenever you can. Develop that skill. That's something I'm personally trying to do in my own life. Questions display an interest in another person. Questions are engaging. They're interactive. They can be probing to help know where to go, and they're amicable. They're part of friendship. So let me just try to illustrate this use of questions a little bit. Example number 1, you're in a conversation and someone says, gender is whatever you want it to be. One answer might be, well, what makes you say that? It's often a very good question. What makes you say that? Well, lots of people on the social media, like Chase Ross. Do you know where gender theory originated? No. A psychologist named John Money over 50 years ago. He was the one who made up the term gender identity and proposed the idea that the physical body had nothing to do with one's gender. Okay, but who cares about who invented the theory? It's important because the theory is now outdated. Really? How so? Well, Money formed his theory before the technology we now have to see that in the female body, every cell has XX chromosomes, and every cell in the male body has XY chromosomes. Do you know what embryology has discovered? No. Well, if the baby's a boy, testosterone shapes the way the baby's brain is formed. Male and female brains develop differently in the very womb. Are you familiar with the field of endocrinology at all? Well, I've heard of it. Similar progress has been made in the field of endocrinology, showing the differences in showing that the levels of difference in testosterone and estrogen in males and females are very closely linked to behavior. Well, so you're saying that science proves that gender is binary? Yes. Well, then why are so many saying that gender is your subjective choice? Well, My thought is that many are mixed up and others are promoting gender ideology for political reasons. Another example, someone at work says to you, I can't believe all the racist conservative states that are passing laws violating transgender rights. Well, what rights are you talking about? You know, the right to be trans, to choose my own pronouns and what bathrooms to use. It's the same old white cisgender discrimination. May I ask a question? Sure. Do you think a 200-pound wrestler is discriminated against when he's not allowed to wrestle in the featherweight 106-pound division? Of course not. That wouldn't be fair. Well, how do you know it's not fair? Because one guy weighs 200 pounds and the other 100 pounds. So their physical bodies determine their weight class. Right. Then why is using a child's physical body, their reproductive organs, to determine which restroom they use discriminatory? That's a good question. Example number 3, someone says, transgender athletes should be able to participate in whatever sports teams they choose. Girls' sports should be open to anyone who says they are female. How might we handle that? May I ask you a question? Okay. Do you know why men's and women's athletic competitions have long been separate? Not really. Guess how much more muscle mass the average man has than woman? 10%? 36%. Men's bones are also thicker and denser. Conversely, women have lower lung volume and lower airflow capacity because they have smaller lungs and airway diameter. Okay, I'll accept your generalizations. Did you know that the International Olympic Committee has a geneticist from UCLA to consult about male and female differences? No, I didn't know that. His name is Eric Villian, and he says there's a 10 to 12% difference between male and female athletic performance. So if a boy who claims to be trans is allowed to compete against girls, who's being treated unfairly? Okay. Let me just close with one more example, which is not a conversation, but is a little bit more proactive. It's taken from a letter that I wrote in my county to the Board of Education, just by way of illustration, and then we'll be done. Directly I wrote these to every individual on that board, used that person's name. I grew up in Montgomery County, attending Kennedy High School. My 5 kids graduated from Sherwood. I'm writing to you because of your proven commitment to the welfare of our children and desire to make good decisions that end well. All Montgomery County school officials want to ensure that no LGBTQ+ person suffers abuse. But this concern makes it easy to confuse two things: the right of transgender children to be protected from bullying with a different issue, the idea that school policy should be based upon the transgender misunderstanding that gender is arbitrarily chosen rather than scientifically observed. Common sense tells everyone that the doctor who says it's a boy does so by observing the child's reproductive organs. Gender theory was disproved by science years ago. These facts are accessible via Wikipedia. Gender theory originated with a psychologist named John Money. The first to coin the term gender as something distinguishable from biological sex. His theory was that every human is born a hermaphrodite, psychologically, that one's gender identity is 100% caused by nurture and not by nature. Since Money proposed his theory 50 years ago, enormous strides have been made in numerous fields of science that have repeatedly disproved this theory. And then I go into those fields of science, as I've done many times throughout these videos. Then I continue. It's a scientific fact that biology determines gender. Gender is binary. However, vast differences in a child's temperament cause many children to resist traditional gender stereotypical roles. We must respect those differences. But MoCo policy must be based upon science and common sense. 4,000 years of history teach that's what science validates. Gender is binary. The transgender child's right to believe she is in a wrong body does not give her the right to violate the rights of other students. The right of girls to be safe from male predators who claim to be trans to get into female locker rooms. The right of girls to compete against other girls, not males who, according to Dr. Eric Villian, consultant to the International Olympic Committee, have a 10 to 12% physiological advantage over females. Or the rights of students to be prepared for future academic work by learning the grammatically correct pronouns instead of the incorrect ones. MoCo parents have a right to expect education that is science-based and does not promote any religious or ideological worldview. Gender theory is a radical ideology which denies science. It opposes the beliefs of every Montgomery County family that practices a major religion: Judaism, Mormonism, Islam, Catholicism, Jehovah's Witnesses, or Protestantism. Montgomery County residents deserve an educational system that prepares children for life in the real world, not an education that teaches an unscientific worldview promoted by radical ideologues. Please do what is best for our children and resist this agenda.